Hello, and welcome to Off the Fence, a podcast where we deconstruct difficult decision making so we can figure out what keeps us stuck, and more importantly, how do we get unstuck? I'm your host, Karen Covey, a former divorce lawyer, mediator, and arbitrator turned coach, author, and entrepreneur. And with me today is my guest, Dr. Juan Santos. With over 10 years of experience in the field of helping others make transformations in life, Dr. Juan Santos is listed in the ranks of the top 3 marriage counselors in his local area. He brings new perspectives for mental health and wellness, for helping individuals and couples build empowerment and take charge of their life and their relationships. Dr. Santos is a first-generation immigrant, originally born in the Dominican Republic and raised in North Carolina. Dr. Santos utilizes a unique mind and body approach to teach individuals how to go from surviving to thriving in life. His work on improving your mental health and quality of life has been featured on radio, TV, magazines, and podcasts. Dr. Santos has presented on topics ranging from managing anxiety to addressing workplace mental health issues at organizations, higher education spaces, and community agencies. Dr. Santos, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. I'm excited.
Oh, I am really excited too, because I know you have done a lot of things already. But what I'd like to focus with you in this podcast is on your work with couples, with marriages, and specifically with infidelity. And I'm going to lead out of the box with the big question. Is it possible for marriages to really recover and thrive after there's been an affair?
It's interesting. That question is one of the most common questions that couples come in with. Right after an affair, they're asking and they're saying, hey, is this possible? Are we actually going to be able to navigate through this? I like to start with like a deep breath, just really inhaling and exhaling and looking at it is possible, but a lot of that is based off of each partner's commitment, their willingness to experience the pain. There's no way around that. Their willingness to experience the hurt, the trauma, which infidelity, recovering after an affair, it's a traumatic experience. Their willingness to go through that. And as they're going through it, this is the next hard part. Going through it in a manner of compassion, of kindness, right? Interesting words, because when something like that happens, it's the opposite. You want to just get those fighting gloves on and lash out and attack or be defensive and protect yourself. And often those are the behaviors that sabotage the process.
But those behaviors are so human. They're so natural.
Yeah.
How do you get past that? How do you, get past the fact that you want to like scratch your partner's eyes out?
Yeah, good question, right? And I think part of that is recognizing that that's going to happen. Very similar to you're out in the sun all day and you get home and you're like, why is my back hurting? Right? It's like it's sunburned. That's what happens when you're out there and you didn't wear sunscreen. So after an affair, this trauma that takes place, it's like you're sitting on a rug and it's pulled out from under you. And you're looking every direction. You feel numb, you feel anxious, you feel hurt, you feel anger. And it's accepting that those feelings are taking place versus running away from them and giving those feelings space. Giving them, go ahead.
What does that mean?
Yeah, good question. Giving them a safe space. So very similar to like a person being at work and they're pissed at their boss. Wouldn't make sense to go up to your boss and give them the middle finger. Right? Or to throw
not if you like your job.
Exactly. Not if you like your job. And that's very similar to a relationship. Because more than likely, this person that went through this affair, if there's just something out there that they want to recover, that means to an extent they like their life. They like the aspects of it. They like the tree that they planted and they like how it's growing. So it's looking at a safe place. A safe place could be that you're working with a coach. A safe place could be a journal. It could be going for a walk. These spaces, and there's many of them, that you connect to each of those feelings, the anger, the frustration, the sadness, the numbness, and allowing yourself to process them.
Okay, that is a beautiful, I want to follow up on that because, a lot of people, I don't think they understand what does it mean to process an emotion? Like, what is that? How do you do that?
Yeah. let's tie that to something interesting. When we look at NAMI, an organization that focuses on mental health,
Hmm.
1 in 5 adults in the US experience a mental illness. And I think that's just something that it's important not to overlook. Many of us have 5 friends and we go, oh shit, maybe 1 in 5, right? One in 5 of us are struggling with some sort of mental illness. So I think it's important to acknowledge that within the layers of an affair, more than likely one or both individuals are struggling to some aspect with their mental health. And that may mean that when we talk about process, they just may not have had the skills to process certain aspects of what has taken place in their life, such as, let's say, an affair and it's connected to disconnect. Maybe they weren't processing that in the relationship. They were avoiding it. Maybe they were, instead of doing that, the hard conversation, I'm going to work my butt off and focus on that instead. Well, years and years after that, there's more and more distance. And maybe somebody else comes in. There's an emotional bond that builds. And before you know it, we're in that category of an affair.
Yeah. And that's interesting. All right, I've got a question. This might not be a fair
Ask
question.
away.
Okay, so do affairs only happen in relationships where there's an issue, like a disconnect? Or can it be that the relationship is going along in a fairly healthy way and someone just makes a mistake or screws up or does, has an affair? What do you think about that?
Yeah, great question again. You're just killing it with these wonderful questions, Karen.
Thank you.
Um, there's like I think there's the social media or getting on TV and you're watching affairs happen, right? Through these sitcoms, and maybe it's often due to some issue, right? The guy's a jerk, or there's no sex in the relationship. So then many of us go, oh, I guess to some degree that makes sense, right? We're connecting the dots. We don't agree with it, but we're connecting the dots. There are other factors, though, that can lead to an affair. And it can be, here's some examples, and there's many of them. It can be that you grew up as a child in a home where that took place. You saw one of the parents actively engaging in it, and maybe that parent talked to you about it. They said, yeah, I'm going out with this person. Maybe you went out with them while they're engaging in that, knowing that the other parent's there. And that parent told you, shh, don't say anything. So you didn't want to break that bond. You wanted to keep a good relationship with that parent. So it was okay. And years after years, the parents never got separated. So you're like, it's fine. So now there's a system that created in there, and that could lead to, even if you're in a healthy relationship on an individual level, because it's different. Many affairs are often connected to both parties, right? Without your partner, there's still you. And
So
yeah,
it's your own stuff that you
yeah.
haven't dealt with.
Correct. Now, there's different coaches and mental health professionals that engage in supporting individuals in affair in different avenues. They may go, we had the affair, both of us. When I'm working with the individuals in couples, I try to get to the root. If I see a plant that's sick, I'm not just going to right away maybe put some new soil on it. I want to pick the whole thing up and look underneath the root system. And there's two people in a relationship. And often what I find is that individually we make decisions, right? If work is shitty, then we individually make a decision to be maybe really upset and throw a chair at work. Not our boss made us do that, right? There are factors, though, in a relationship where if you're with a partner and it's been years since you've had an intimacy, that you're able to, right, justify and say, well, I had an affair because there's years of lack of intimacy, and I've spoken to my partner and they're not willing to do anything about this. So we just pause for a moment and go, you made that decision, right? Yes, we comprehend that your partner was involved in that process. And here's where I find this helpful. I think it's a tough pill to swallow. I find it helpful when we look at growth. Growth is heavily connected to an individual level of accountability, right? Your own level of accountability. That same person can say, you know what? There's been a lack of intimacy for years. Here's what I'm going to do. I want to, and then they have a hard conversation, the ones that we often avoid. They go, maybe I want to stay married. However, I feel that in our relationship, not all of my domains are being met. I'd like to bring a third party in where that the domain of physical intimacy is met. Are you willing to remain in this marriage, knowing this new context has taken place? And right.
Yeah, that's so you're getting to the heart of what I hear in my work with so many people. It's the unwillingness to have that hard conversation, to be honest, sometimes to even be honest with yourself and
Hard.
say, you know what? I don't like what's going on in this relationship. I'm not happy. I'm not fulfilled. So I'm going to have, instead of saying, I'm going to go act out, say, I'm going to start with having a conversation with my spouse, with the other person in this relationship,
Hmm.
and see if we can come to resolve it. And the interesting or ironic thing is that you're afraid to have the conversation because you're afraid that the relationship will dissolve.
Yeah.
But you're still, by having the affair, you're doing the thing that will cause the relationship to dissolve. So how does, like, in the human psyche, how does this work?
Yeah. So and when I sit with couples, I help them together. We look at, was this the sign of the relationship dissolving? And often this is just a loud one. This is the one that maybe you walked in and saw your partner, or you picked up the phone and saw messages. And we go a little bit deeper. We pick up the plant, we look at the root, and then we identify that the relationship was already dissolving. In the beginning, you were dating once a week. You haven't been on a date in months. So there's a lack of investment in that category, right? Your bank is your relationship. And it goes into what you're sharing with, those are those hard conversations that we avoid. So we may focus more on work, focus more on the kids, focus more on something else, and we hope that it goes away, but it doesn't go away. Indirectly it stays there.
Yeah, and so let me take you back a little bit, and let's say there's a couple and one of them has had an affair. They find themselves in your office for the first time. They've got all these emotions, right? And you help them process the emotions, but then what? Because if their marriage was working,
Mm-hmm.
they might want to go back to it, but chances are, from what I'm hearing you say, there's other problems. How do you help them deal with all of that and create the relationship they really want to be in?
Yeah, there's so much to that equation, and part of that is, if we want help, we have to be willing to receive help, right? We have to be willing to put our
Ah,
own mindset aside, our own ego, and say, okay, I'm in this space, and this, if it's a personal trainer, I'm going to listen to them and do the squats they're telling me to do. And it's hard to get out of your own way, yet necessary. So I think that's one aspect. The other is, when you're in this space, being able to acknowledge that it's probably going to be these ups and downs, these valleys. They go high, they go low, and there's often times where one partner is at a closer point of healing. Like, they're like, you know what, I'm feeling really good about this. I think we've made a lot of progress, and the other one's like, I'm way back here. I am way back here. I am not, I'm not healed. I'm at a 4 out of 10. So that creates a bit of a difference there.
yeah, I think that's important. It's an important point for people to hear, that the road to recovery isn't a straight line up,
Mm-mm. Yeah.
that it's got those peaks and valleys, and that both people in the couple may be on the journey at different, there are different spots in the journey, I guess,
Hmm.
would be the best way
Yes.
to say it. So how do you help the people when one person's an 8 out of 10 and one person's a 2 out of 10?
Hmm.
What do you do with that?
Yeah, it's such a tough area, because we often want others to be very similar to where we are at. If I'm in pain, I want you in pain. And if I'm doing great, I want you to be doing great. And we see that even in normal occasions. You're at a birthday party and you're having a good time. You see someone with a poor attitude, and you go, what's wrong with them? Right.
Yeah, 100%.
Exactly, 100%. Such an interesting item there. And when working with a couple as they're recovering after an affair, I try to encourage them to share that, to be open and vulnerable, to hear one another. So that one's able to say, I feel like I've processed a lot of the affair, and I feel like I don't think about it as often. And then the other one may go, that's so different than me. I think about it every day. And now you have this potential clash, because the one that thinks about it every day, they may want to talk about it every day with the other one. But the other one, they're further ahead. They may say, hey, it doesn't, when we talk about it, I just feel worse and worse. So with that, I try to encourage them to create structure around it. We don't want to avoid one another. So we
Mhm.
have structure very similar to, work. You go in and you clock out, then you're done. So we structure time on when your partner wants to share aspects of the infidelity, the affair. Let's do like your own 20-minute session on it and let them know what you're needing. Guide your partner. Say, I need you just to listen. I just need you to listen and say nothing.
Mhm.
And then you speak. And then after that 20 minutes and you share those thoughts that you had of the affair, provide gratitude, right? No one has to listen to us. So we provide gratitude for their willingness to be able to listen to something they do not want to listen to because they're further ahead on healing.
That is, I don't think I've ever heard anyone say that before. That's so interesting and so challenging at the same time, because let's just say that, let's talk about the victim of the affair, the person who was cheated on,
Yeah,
to be able to have a conversation with the cheater and say, okay, thank you for listening.
right. So
It
crazy.
feels like,
Yeah, because it's like you hurt me. Now I'm showing you gratitude. But we look at the bigger picture. The bigger picture is these two people, they're raising their hand and saying, we want to go through the trenches and try to make this relationship work. So that means you're going to have to do hard things to grow.
Yeah. And how do you, like, have you ever had the situation where the couple comes into you and one person says, I really want to make this relationship work. I want to work through this. I want to heal. And the other person's like, I don't know. I don't know if I'm in or if I'm not in. Convince me. Like, what do you do
Yeah.
with a situation where you have two people who are in, like, how do you help them make the decision about whether this is even what they want to do?
With those, I often shift them into more individual coaching. So they may come in with that. And then from that point, I look at them and say it's difficult because you don't have a common goal. If you look at the 7 habits of highly effective people,
Yep.
Stephen Covey, is that pronounced
Covey.
accurate? Covey.
Like me,
Um,
only no relation.
the end in mind. So that's one of those pillars, and I bring that up with them on. You both need to be on the same page of knowing what is the end in mind, and
Yeah.
if yours is you want to work on it, and the other partner is I don't know, we're not going to get too far. We're probably going to bump heads along the way. So individual work, through that individual work, we process, and then they see what they want to do with it.
So, all right, another burning question that I hear from my clients a lot is, if one person isn't willing to work on it, they don't want to go to marriage counseling, they don't want to go to even individual therapy, they just think that they can handle this themselves, right? Can a couple do this work alone when one person wants to move forward and the other one's like, eh?
Yeah, great. I guess that question goes a lot back to the individual. I've worked with individuals in one-on-one setting where getting to know the person, they shared that they recovered from an affair and they didn't go see a coach. They didn't go into any of these professional settings. So a lot of us, we have many skills, maybe emotional intelligence, maybe a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. So we may have some of these skills to support us to go through these traumatic, difficult experiences.
Well,
Now, I'm sorry, go ahead.
how do you access those skills though? Like, I think we have things inside of us that we don't perhaps realize.
Mhm.
So that person who has the capacity, the capability to get over the affair by themselves, how do they access that part of them that allows them to heal and move on?
Yeah, and I think you mentioned this earlier, being willing to like look at your reflection in the mirror and really think about, how am I living my life? What are my values? Am I living by those? And am I connecting to my mission statement? Very similar to a business, right? All these wonderful businesses have
Mhm.
missions and visions, and they are so active with it. And if you ever done business coaching, they take you through that. I'm making your own mission and vision. So
Mhm.
many couples that I work with and individuals, we do very similar work to that. And I'm assuming these individuals are able to do it on their own. They're probably pretty connected to what their values are, what their habits are. Maybe they're reading certain books and then applying it.
Interesting. So, I know you've also, as part of what you do, you've also created self-help courses, because certain people, like I've worked with people who they're like, yeah, I don't do therapy. I just, like, for whatever reason in their past, they're just they have a very negative idea of what therapy is. And you've created some self-help courses. Can you talk a little bit about those and what they do?
Absolutely. And part of that message is what led to myself going into the coaching realm. So my foundational education, going through bachelor's, master's, and doctorate, is in the clinical academic mental health space, license and so forth. And working with more clients, some of them will come up and have shared, I want something a bit different. I don't want the structure that comes with maybe insurance. I want to be able to, work with you for like 4 or 5 hours. I want to be able to maybe text you things that are happening in my life. And all of those have a lot of like privacy aspects that a typical counselor wouldn't be able to do.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I started to bridge into coaching and taking on clients on providing coaching and courses. Courses are for my individuals that they may work with me one session. And then after that, they're like, we're going to go in and we're able to do it on our own. So that I find that wonderful for them. I'm one of those where if I want to learn something, I may hire a consultant, do one initial session, and then I see what products they have. And then I'll go and pick up the book or pick up the course, and I can hold the discipline to engage with it.
Yeah,
So,
you've
no,
just
go
brought
ahead.
up, sorry, I'm going to take us a little bit off path. I'm sorry to interrupt, but um, coaching versus therapy. Can you speak to what's the difference between the two?
Yeah, there's a lot of aspects that do differ from a very basic model. The counseling, so the mental health counseling, especially here in the US where I'm at, there are a lot of criteria that hone it. Criteria could connect to if you take insurance. Now, with an insurance patient or client, you're bound to like a 45 or 50-minute session. There's a lot of HIPAA in there where I have to make sure that all of our conversation is extremely confidential. Coaching differs in the aspect of we don't go as deep into the clinical psychology of mental health. We work, let's say, on mindset, on behavior modification, and so forth, but we don't have those bounds. I could see you in a session like this using Zoom versus having to go through a more private process. You can have my number, and as you're navigating life, shoot me a text or an email, and then we can go back and forth. And I find that with executives, typically high functioning individuals that are on the go, the
Mm-hmm.
coaching model works really well because they're wanting that support during those situations. And I think they're both great. There's just different individuals that go into each category.
That's interesting. Okay, so now that we've gone on that little side definition, let's get back to the courses. And it sounds like for those high functioning individuals, the executives, the people who really they don't have a serious mental illness, they just have a problem that they're dealing with, that the online course model, the self-help model could work for them.
Yes. Yeah. And I'm not just going to put them in that category. There's
Okay,
other
say more.
individuals, I think, many of us, I don't see the course getting in the way for the average Joe. There's courses in there that I have that focus on anxiety, which is a common mental health challenge. But maybe this person doesn't want to go into a whole counseling session and go from session after session. So they're able to come in and get the tools, put them into play in their life. And if they find that the tools aren't taking them to the exact level they're wanting to get to, then there is the additional avenue. There's courses for couples to help them recover after an affair, courses for couples that haven't tied the knot yet, but they know the divorce rate is extremely high. So there's a course in there that they're building the fundamental tools, the foundation to a successful relationship.
That's really, really wonderful too. I know I've had another guest on here too that does what she calls intentional relationship design, where it's sitting down and having the difficult conversations before you're even married so that you
Mm-hmm.
understand what you're getting into and can create a relationship that maybe gives you a step up, that gives you a little more protection against that high divorce rate, although
Yeah.
there's never, I mean, nothing's 100%,
No.
but at least if you've had the conversations. That's why I tell my clients about, like, I really believe in the value of prenups, even if you never write it and you never sign it, because having, it forces you to have financial conversations which are full of emotion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
before you tie the knot.
Yeah.
So what kinds of subject matter do you think that a couple should, like if they're contemplating marriage, what are the areas that they should focus on, talk about, and deal with before they say I do?
Yeah. And these, just as a side note, they relate heavily to recovering after an affair. And if I just want to tag that for a moment, what helps couples is knowing that you're not going back to the same relationship,
What do you mean?
right? Well, if we go back to the same relationship, we're probably going to go back to another affair.
Aha.
So you really got to think about like the mindset in that this thing didn't magically happen. So we don't want to go back to the same relationship, nor do you want to go back to the same version of you. And
Yeah.
within that fabric is the framework that goes into developing a strong foundation to couples before they get married, right? These tools. And as you share, they're not bulletproof, but if we use them and we consistently polish them, they're going to get us very far.
That's interesting. And I can see the parallel. I mean, the concept is the same, the circumstances are different, but
Correct.
it's
Yeah.
about actually creating a relationship that you want to be in with, shared values, shared goals, shared ideas about lifestyle.
Yeah.
The question is, how do you do that? Is there a framework for having those conversations? And what is it you should be talking about? Is it like money? Obviously, would be
Yeah.
one
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
But what else, what should couples be talking about? Is there some guide for them of
Mhm.
what to do?
Yeah, so there's a guide, there's these factors that go into the exact conversations. And before I go heavily with them on the conversations, I work a lot on learning how to listen, learning how to have hard conversations, right? So I go into like those mindset hacks. Are you able to process? Are you able to stop what's up here while your partner is speaking? Are you able to remove that need to prove your point? And we work on those areas, especially with my coaching clients before really going into let's talk about money, let's talk about religion, let's talk about your roles. So those variables, those would be some of the premarital topics, such as if I have a new couple and there's no kids, I say let's talk about what your roles are right now, right? You just applied for a job and your job is this relationship. What is the job expectation? How often is there a performance evaluation?
Oh,
Right? So those type of
ouch.
aspects. And then I go into, well, what's going to happen when you have kids? Because I'm pretty sure your roles are going to change and you both need to catch up to each other. So that's where relationships can get really in difficult moments where they don't refresh. And that is one area. Money, I love that, you brought that up, being able to bring that with the couple. And all of these have to do with just tough conversations that we often avoid, and we don't want to hurt each other's feelings, but we have to be willing to do that.
Yeah, I've had so many clients and different people reach out to me and say, I don't like conflict. I am conflict avoidant.
Mhm.
But how can I help my relationship?
Yeah,
What do you
exactly.
say to someone like that? How do you help? It sounds to me, and I don't have your credentials, but it sounds like it's almost a mindset thing where they've decided I don't do conflict, and
Hmm.
therefore they skirt it, they go around it, they never have the conversations.
Yeah.
What hack would you give to somebody to help them to start embracing conflict, at least a little bit,
Yeah.
rather than avoiding?
Yeah. And this ties heavily into the affair recovery. And overall, just a life hack here. I like to listen. So, and I have many individuals share the same thing. Like, I avoid conflict. It makes my stomach hurt. It doesn't feel good. And they give me all these reasons why they do it. And you know what? They all make sense. Like they all make sense. And I share that with them. I validate it. I go, hey, that makes sense. Me too. Then I said, let me ask you a question. I want you to think about your entire life, the entire life. Tell me what areas of your life do you confront? And they think on it. They go, what do I confront?
Huh.
And I go, think about like mundane things. Like if you're at the grocery store and they rang you up for $100, but you just bought a $10 item, tell me all these examples. And they're like, well, yeah, I guess at Target, if I'm always looking at the cashier and the dollar sign, and if it's wrong, I go, hey, that one's actually on sale. And I go, well, look at you confronting out there in the world. And what it does is it hits the brain in a really wonderful way. It's like this immense feeling of, I can do something that I thought was really hard. And we go into the aspect of what's called a transferable skill. So we're transferring skills here.
Okay, what does that mean?
Literally, it means that you transfer the skill. So
Okay.
we're able to together acknowledge at the grocery store, you're confronting the cashier. So that's a skill that you're doing. We're going to transfer it over to your relationship.
Wow. And you actually talk to them about transferring the skill.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay, cool.
And from there, they feel great. At that point, I look at reducing stress that comes with confrontation by giving it structure. So structure would be where we create a time frame, maybe sending their partner a text ahead of time and saying, hey, tomorrow, let's sit down. Here's a topic I want to talk about. And let's do it just for 15 minutes. So now it's time bound, it's specific, they're in and out. That reduces even more of the stress. And maybe I add more to that if I'm working with the other partner on highlighting rules. Like, here's the rules during confrontation. We're going to do keynote speaker. Keynote speaker means one person speaks, the other one just listens.
Yeah.
And now that goes well. And because that is a positive experience, the brain goes, ta-da, you have this positive experience to rely on. And the next time they engage in confrontation, instead of going back to all the negatives, they think about the positive one they have, and they think about the areas that they were already doing a great job with.
I love this. I think this is so it's so powerful. It's what you're teaching them is not only relationship skills, but communication skills,
Mm-hmm.
which are all tied into a relationship. And
Yes.
this it definitely applies to people who have had an affair, because you get the people it's a natural tendency to want to engage in name calling and you
Yes.
did this to me and I'm the victim, or for the person who had the affair to take too much responsibility, like to the point where it's like, yeah, it's all my fault,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm done, by the way.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting. What you're teaching people is just basic how to talk and listen, how
Yeah.
to listen and hear somebody,
Yeah.
how to help somebody feel heard. And I
Mm-hmm.
often talk with my clients about that. Until your spouse feels like you
Mm-hmm.
heard them, they keep repeating all the
Exactly.
same
Yeah.
nonsense because they don't feel heard.
Yeah. And it takes a skill to do that. I think it was Maya Angelou that said people remember how you made them feel. I always like to remind those that I work with, speak to be heard. So it
How
makes
do
you
you
really,
mean speak to be heard?
if you think about that and you're like, okay, I'm going to speak, I'm going to say some things. But before I say them, my focus is on being heard. So if I get home and my spouse is doing something with the kids and I start blabbering off about something, I'm sabotaging myself because
Yeah,
I'm speaking, but it's in a setting where more than likely I will not be heard.
that makes sense.
And it's easy for me to blame her and go, you never listened to me. I'm not going to get too far blaming the world, but I will get really far if I point that finger at myself and look at vulnerability and accountability.
It sounds like a lot of what you're talking about is personal responsibility.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's the thing that so many of us, I mean, it's hard to do,
Mm-hmm.
but and it's hard to understand that until you do, you can't ever have the relationship that you want. Because if you're always blaming your
Yeah,
spouse or whoever you're in, it doesn't have to be a spouse. If you're
anybody.
blaming your partner all the time for everything that's wrong in the relationship, that relationship isn't going to thrive for very long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's just one aspect, and I wanted to touch on it because I think it's often not spoken about when it comes to recovery after an affair. And there's the victim that there's heavy communication on and what they're going through. But then there's also the betrayer, the one that committed the affair. And that individual often experiences, from my experience, heavy amount of depression, heavy amount of shame. And if we look at shame, we look at depression, there's connection there to suicide. Not saying that that's a direction the individual is going to go to. I just want to shed light on it's important that when a couple is working on recovering after an affair, sometimes we go really internal and we go, look at all the things I'm going through. It's important to take a moment and just jump out of your own shoes and think about what both parties are going through, right? There's the one that committed the affair, and they're going to live with that. And that may be a shame that they hold. And if any of us have ever felt shame in life, you can right away acknowledge what that does to you. It doesn't feel good. It lingers. It eats up at you. It steals away your joy. So now if you have this couple and they're trying to recover after an affair, and the attention is only on one person, only on the victim, over time, something's going to happen and it's not going to be something good.
Yeah. I mean, I work with a lot of people who are, I mean, in both roles, but the person who had the affair, like you said, I mean, they have the disconnect of, I never thought I was the kind of person who would do this, but I did. And now what does that mean? And I mean, there's a lot of guilt, a lot of shame. And so I think it's really valuable that you say, yeah, I mean, there's two people in the relationship and both of them have to heal and both of them have to deal with their stuff and get attention to their issues in order to collectively move past it.
And that's the strength that I find there. Like the couples that thrive versus survive, they acknowledge that. They look at this journey as a collective effort. Like they want to hear about what the other person, and they'll say that, and the other one goes, "What?" Like the betrayer will say to the victim, like, "You actually care and want to hear that I think about, how shitty was this? What type of person am I?" And they're like, "Yeah, because if I didn't know any of that, and not knowing any of that makes me think that you don't care."
Yeah.
Right. And that's extremely powerful to know the impact and the beautiful transformation it can have on a relationship.
Yeah. Well, this has been such an enlightening conversation, but I don't want to leave it before we talk about, I know you and I have talked offline about a special discount you have for the listeners to this podcast. So tell me more about that.
Yeah, so you can visit Juan B. Santos, and that's Juan B as in boy, Santos, SANTOS.com website. On there, you're going to see link to all the courses. So find the one that fits you. If you're struggling with anxiety, go for the anxiety one. Relationships, go into those. And you're going to have a discount. The discount's going to be using the code off the fence.
I love that. Thank you so much. This has been such an enlightening conversation. I think one that's going to help a lot of people on so many levels. So thank you for sharing your wisdom. And for those of you out there who are watching, who are listening, if you like what you heard, it will help this podcast immeasurably if you just like, subscribe, and share. I would really appreciate it. So thank you all for listening, and I will see you again next time. Thanks, Dr. Santos.